Okay, in this video we're going to talk about functions and how it relates to Python. Now, functions essentially are just a grouping of statements that get executed upon call. Okay, we use functions for a lot of different reasons. Simpler code, code reuse, it makes for faster development, and it really facilitates teamwork, really is the big thing. Very rarely do you see programs that just simply run through. They have functions that they'll call back and forth to do various different things. And it's just the idea that using these functions, we can accomplish a lot of good things. Okay? So what we're going to talk about here is kind of give you a little introduction into what functions are and how they can work for us with Python. Now, there are really two main categories of functions, if you will. There is what's called the void function, which basically does what it's supposed to do and terminates. And it's pretty simple and pretty clean. Then you have value returning functions. These are what allow me to return a value based on either information it got or just different processing. Various different things that you could do, okay? But those are really the two main categories, and we're going to start with looking at a void function and just kind of see how those work and how we can work through those, okay? So I'm here in my interpreter. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to go up to File and New File, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to learn some syntax, learn some instructions, and also create a function, okay? So we're going to create ourselves a function. DEF is the statement that we use, or the instruction we use that defines a function. And I'm going to call this function message, okay? Now, message really isn't going to be anything fancy. All it's going to do is print a statement that says, hello, here's my message, okay? Nothing fancy, just something pretty simple. Now, the name of the function is interesting in that it follows the same rules that we do with variables, meaning you can't use keywords, you can't have spaces, it can be letters and numbers, it can start with an underscore, okay? A lot of those rules, essentially all the rules that apply to a variable also apply to a function. So this here is a void function, and again, it's DEF to define. Message is the function's name, and then left and right parentheses followed by a colon. Indentation is important. You'll notice the indentation there. We follow the same rules that we had to do with our if and our whiles and our fors. Okay, we talked about the looping stuff. And I'm just printing a simple message. Okay. Once I have that, then I just need to call the function. Okay, and it's just a matter of, the name of the function followed by the left and right parentheses. Okay, so nothing real fancy here, just pretty simple. Okay, so I'm going to go up here to run. It's going to ask me to save my file, so I'm going to do so here. I'm going to save it in my Python folder here, and I'm going to call this my first function. Okay, so we're going to save this. And when it executes, you see here, it just basically does what I asked it to. It prints a message, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward. When you really look at the code itself is pretty straightforward. Okay? And we can do whatever we want with these functions. Okay? So DEF, again, is the instruction. We then have our function name, our left and right parenthesis followed by our colon, and then whatever text we want in here. And then we call our function. Now, not only can we call a function like this, we can also create a function and call another one with inside of it. So I'm going to create a function called main. Okay? I'm going to print a statement that says I am going to call the message function. So then I'm going to print, I'm going to take how I called my message function there, And I'm going to print another line that says the message above was from the message function. Okay? So what I have here is I have a main function is what I called it. I'm going to print a statement that says I'm going to call the message function. It's going to call that function and do whatever it says, and then it's going to print this final statement. So the last thing I need to do now is call main, right? Because eventually you still have to call that main function to get everything started. Okay, so I'm going to go up here and run this. Obviously it's going to ask me to save again, and that's fine. We'll click OK, and here you go. I'm going to call the message function. Hello, here's my message. And the above message is from the message function. So you can see that what we did was when main was executed, it looked for the main function. And it found it, and it printed this first statement. Once that was completed, it went down to this statement, which was the message function being called. So what happened was temporary control went from main up here to message. It printed this statement, and once that statement was finished, it returns control back to from where it came. So it gets to this, right, end of this statement here, it prints this message, it comes back, and then prints the statement below it. Okay? Pretty simple, okay? The interpreter goes line by line and reads them and calls the functions as it sees fit. Okay? So again, nothing real major here. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's all about that top-down programming. Now, the thing that we have to remember, okay, is that a function must be defined before you can call the function. Meaning, if I was to take main, okay, and if I put main here, okay, if I try to run it, I'll show you here, I'm going to run this, you're going to find I'm going to get an error saying main was not defined. Okay, so the same rules still apply. In fact, they're very similar to what they were the variables. You cannot call a function until the function's been defined. It's just like the variables. You can't use a variable until you've assigned it a value. Same way here. You know, I can't call main until main is defined. Okay. What I typically tell people, one of my practices, I guess, would be is that I would put the variables at the top. Okay. Or I'm sorry, the functions. Okay, functions. I actually do the variables at the top too, but your functions, I would declare all of those up front. Get them to a point where you've got them all pretty much done, and then write the rest of the code. So big thing is that way you make sure you get them defined before you start to use them. Okay, and that's the big thing. All right. So now we've done some pretty simple functions. Again, you can do functions within functions. So here we have, let's create another message, or let's create another function. So we're going to call this one another message. We're going to print, here is my other message. Okay, and what I'm going to do is inside of here, we just have one print statement. Okay, so now I'm going to call main, and what I'm going to do is inside of my main function down here, I'm going to call another message. Okay, so nothing real big here. Again, what it's going to do is it's going to call main. Main's going to print this statement, call this function. It's going to go up here and do this. It's going to print another statement and then call this. It's going to go down here and call that one. Now, am I going to get an error? Well, I called another message before this was declared. But let's think about this a minute. Python is very top-down. So it doesn't process it in any other way. Here, then here, then here, then here, then here, all the way down. Now here's the thing. Another message is called, but not until after main is called. Okay? So I call main. Well, by the time I call main, Python has seen all this code here. So before I've actually called another message, it's been defined because I don't call it until after I call main. Let me show you. So I'll run this module. And you see I don't get any errors. Again, the reason why is because this was defined before I called it. Okay? So even that, I could have main clear the top and do all these later. What you got to remember is that you can't call a function until it's been defined. But in saying that, this was not called until after I called main. And by the time the interpreter got down here to read main, it had already run and loaded this function into memory. And by the time it put that function in memory, now we're okay, call main and go about our business. Okay? So when you work with functions, functions in their very simplistic state is very simple and very straightforward. Okay? The next video we're going to talk about how to get into variables and how we can pass values to different functions with this. Okay? But I wanted to kind of give you a simple little thing and look at how functions work and some basic processing. Alright, well if you have questions as always, feel free to contact me. If not, I bid you good morning, good afternoon, good evening.